In the late 1950s, it was time to go to war again. Because, well, Franco, a big important part of it, and he really believed this. This was not just for, I think, public relations, but really what we have is another kind of just really power trip to kind of restore the destiny of Spain, because Morocco at this time had gained independence. It wanted the Ifni region back and fought a war against Spain, and Franco, who was going to be like, no way, we are keeping this territory. We have an empire, guys. This is an empire. Spain is great. We have an empire, I swear. Pretty much wanting to appear like the great kind of a Spanish conquistador of old, fought a war, won the war with the help of France, actually, and was later pressured by the U.S. to give it back a good chunk of the land, a region called Tarfaya in Morocco that was won, and pressured by the U.S. and the international community. By 1963, Franco really kind of thought, I really think he thought that he had enough control of the country to kind of ease off the authoritarianism a little bit, decided to end the military tribunals and establish civilian courts, actually giving the people a right in the kind of judicial system. Really, 20 plus years after he was kind of in power, 1939 to like 1963, there, that was the kind of the first step in kind of a public relations campaign to convince people that Spain was trying to be a respectable country, and they did tone down a lot of the things, and really that they were doing that were so awful, and the kind of the first 9 years was really when it was at its worst. But they did continue with a lot of that. But this really was the really demoralizing aspect of it. They won. They had complete control over society. No other force had risen to challenge Franco at any time. Ruthlessly been snuffed down. That hadn't been ruthlessly snuffed out. There was no threat, and there just didn't seem to be one for any time in the near future. Things were looking rosy for Frankie. At this time also, he did take some steps to allow freedom of the press, freedom of worship, and got himself so ingratiated with the U.S. that they asked him to participate in a war of their own. Somewhere in, let me see. Oh, Vietnam. Great. No, they quickly said no to that, because unlike Lyndon Johnson, Franco was actually a competent military commander and saw no use in fighting a war in a jungle that was thousands of miles away on the other side of the world, no matter how anti-communist he was. He had his economy stabilized. People weren't fighting all the time. He had control over pretty much everything. No separatists were really causing any problems. No trade unionists, no leftists. Things were all good. Why get involved in any of this stuff? But he knew he had to keep the U.S. happy. Otherwise, what had been the point of these last few years? So he sent a team of field medics. Remember our young monarch in training, Juan Carlos? He was ready to be revealed. Also, someone with an incredible case of lazy eye. He had the flashy succession planned, and in 1969, he was announced as the new king, succeeding Franco, and really completing the traditionalist Spanish monarchical picture. Hooray! So, Franco at this point, we're talking 1960s, 1970s right now, coronation already sworn, and we have the real ruler at this point, with Franco getting a little old now, is Carrero Blanco. But Carrero Blanco did not really last for too long, because he was blown up by the ETA while riding in his car. The ETA is I believe, Basque separatist group. Yeah, Basque separatist group that really overdid it, because the car somehow flew so high up that it literally flew over an entire church and landed on someone's terrace. A few houses down. It was massive. It was insane. It was violent. It was crazy. And really kind of led to the saying starting to be passed around: up with Spain, up with Franco, even higher than Carrera Blanco. Blanco, I guess you got to say it like Blanco to make it rhyme. But that was not all. Those terrorists were quickly executed. Those freedom fighters, some might say, and that drew surprisingly huge demonstrations in Spain proper and massive condemnation from the international community. Franco, though, didn't really seem to care. He was too old at this point and starting to kind of get back in his old ways a little bit, but not that it mattered. It wasn't the 1950s anymore, folks. Times had really changed. Franco had lost a lot of his touch and died of natural causes in Madrid in 1975. So, that settles that. What a legacy. What a really wake of ruthlessness, blood, death, destruction, and oppression in his wake. He was someone who was a politician through and through, but really, if you look at what motivated a lot of through him, and how much times has changed since where he started and where he finished up, this guy was still in imperial mindset in 1950s and 1960s global politics, which, if you think about it, is kind of insane, but that is really what drove him. It was a desire to see Spain back to the days of the conquistadors, back to the days of chopping off heads and brutal executions, and boy, did he get them there. But at what cost? As it turns out, a great one. We take this moment to remember the 100 to 2,000 people lost through the Franco regime. I also want to take this moment to examine a little bit about what Spain is doing to remember the crimes, and what Spain has done to remember the crimes of Franco. After Spain's loss of Franco, after his death in 1975, Spain obviously said farewell to 4 decades of authoritarianism, and the transition period that followed, the country embraced the notion that only a clean slate could prevent the recurrence of conflict. The result was the 1977 amnesty law, which was, I mentioned earlier, was negotiated by the regime's most moderate factions and handful of opposition parties, which stipulated that no one would be brought to account for the crimes committed during the Civil War or the dictatorship. In the decades after, amnesty laws became common in countries emerging from military regimes. Many of those laws would be overturned, but Spanish authorities have continued to defend their version as a pillar of democracy. Martin Lopez wrote her first letter to a government official around the time that the amnesty was enacted. She was living with her husband and their 3 teenage children in a town a few miles away from Pedro Bernardo on the opposite side of the Tietar River, the New Yorker reported in the way back in the year of 2019, January 10th, 2019. This article was in the New Yorker. So, yeah, Martin de la Cruz, she's continued to write these letters, and it really kind of shows the muddled opinions that Spain has on this. A lot of it is, it's so fresh, it's so open, and a lot of it is very, very contentious, and because the violence is still, it's well within living memory, and people do not want to see that again. There is now, unfortunately, the rise of a disturbingly similar and very Francoist type party, Vox, but there has been, luckily, as I mentioned in 2012, a Spanish court on Wednesday, around February 2012, heard accounts of the atrocities committed by Franco, and some justice was brought through those cases. In 2018, a judge decided to investigate Franco-era crimes against a Spanish woman, Maria Servini de la Cubria, has been looking into human rights abuses during the Spanish dictatorship since 2010, when a group of survivors petitioned her to launch an investigation under the principle of universal jurisdiction. This is how they're kind of getting around this. The victims are using the principle which allows the human rights crimes committed in one country to be investigated and tried in another, because of the amnesty law passed in 1977 in Spain, which returned to democracy, granted also, of course, granted, as I mentioned, impunity to those involved in the crime. So this judge, she's going to be in Argentina doing these crimes, and that seems to be the only way they can get justice. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Uprising. We'll be back next week with more great history.
Yo creo en muchas cosas que no he visto, y ustedes